Okay, so time to export some files to our router machine. So um, what I'm going to be doing today is creating what we call a production file. So I'm going to be taking parts that need to be routed and get them ready onto a separate page and get them ready for export, clean them up and stuff like that. So that involves using layers and all of that. So I just thought I'd show you basically how I do it. So starting with all the different pages here, I've already set up my page. This is the blank page and it's already named. We can go over that some other time, but they're basically, the name of the page is the file name. So I have a macro that helps me name these pages based on the material that they're made out of. See down here at the bottom, the material is 090 aluminum, and it gives a brief description of what it is. So this helps keep things organized, and also these become automatically the file names when I go to export, so it makes things easier. Again, we don't want to type, that's for animals. So first thing I get here is the page turner. Now I created this because working with pages in Corel becomes very tedious, especially when you get lots of pages. So if you look down here in the left corner, this is page 8 of 14. So after a while, having to click back and forth, so what I did is I created this guy here that will make a list of everything, all the names, and it lets me jump to that immediately. Makes it very easy. Plus I created a sticky return, so if I want to keep one page ready to come back to, like page 12, I will be referencing this back and forth a couple of times. So that keeps this sticky, and that way I can keep page 2 ready to go to. So now I can go back and forth. So the way most of this works is I use these pages, these work pages, to create wireframes of the actual sign itself, and then I use that to create all of the parts virtually with wireframes. And from that, I am able to then construct using the front side and the back side, and I create the pieces, and each piece gets created. And so having all the holes lined up for the clicos and having mounting clips and all of that ready to go. But this page is chaos, and this is just one of many pages. So how do we get the parts to the router? So then what I do is I break it up into digestible chunks. So this particular file will be only the main face frame. So that way it's easy to digest. There's not a lot going on. The skins they're going to get their own. The faces get their own file. So that way it's easy to go. So the main thing is the frame pieces here and the jigs that hold them together. So these are the route jigs and these are the face frames. So being that I've already done this is kind of what we're hoping to achieve here. So it's kind of organized. It has a sort of flow. Chaos is, kind of upsetting one shape, and then you go from one page to the next, to the next, to the next. It kind of helps if it sort of flows, and that way it's sort of organized as people flip through, because our router department uses this, and also fabrication uses this for reference for all the pieces. So every sign we make gets digested into Lego pieces basically, and then it all gets routed, and then it all gets put together very quickly. So you have to pay the piper somewhere. So a lot of times you pay the piper later by having to manually cut metal, but you can, get started quickly. But it means that you spend a lot of time on the shop floor cutting angle and welding and stuff, where if you pay a little bit more up front, get everything organized, then the sign is essentially already built virtually. And all you're doing is sending parts, and your fab department just puts it together, and it all goes together. So much more streamlined towards the back end where the actual hard work is. If you do the hard work up front using technology, it makes it a lot easier. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and get the frame B ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and go to sticky return, page 12. And I need to grab the frame. So I'm just going to grab everything. This is where you leave everything. You leave this version. You don't need to clean this up here. You leave this as a version ready for if you ever have to change something or something. You don't, you leave this as a version that's, as is. But what you do is you copy this. I'm going to clear my clipboard. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to go right back over here, and I'm just going to paste it. And then we're going to bring it down. Now, as you can see, my native page size up here on the left is 800 by 600 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stretch it to 1,000 inches over here. So I have down on the bottom here on my sidekick, I have the distance X and distance Y for my page. So I'm just going to kick that over to 1,000, and that's going to give me a little more breathing room. So I'm not going to worry about this right now. Just leave it. Just leave it. Just make sure it's out of the way, because when you come in to cut and paste, there'll be other stuff coming in hot. So we're going to go ahead and leave that. And then we're going to do is just grab, I know that I need these jigs. These are the jigs that for the back of the frame. See, I have it labeled, because eventually this whole thing will be exported as a reference PDF for Fab, and they can kind of, they basically now learned how to do this. So when they come to this page, they understand that this is the back of the frame and the front of the frame and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and we'll sneak back over to this, and we'll hit paste over here. And then so that's jigs. So I like to keep the main stuff on one side, and then as you go to the right, you have all your jigs over here. So there's that. Now we're going to make some room for that right now. Let's slide this over. These are the back of the face frames, so we'll put them to over here. That'll be the back jigs. And so, and again, none of this is totally important. You could have this as chaos. You could have this all over, but it's unsettling. It's just nice to have a flow. And when you get used to the flow over the many years, then it's kind of like the production department kind of expects to see things in a certain way. And it's actually, it sounds silly, but it's comforting to know that that's what it's going to look like. And you kind of get used to seeing where jigs are going to be, and you kind of get used to seeing where, all that stuff is. So. All right, so these are the front side jigs, and these are the back side. So we're good to go. So that's all I want on this page. This is just frames. So go ahead and save that. So now what we do is kind of get it roughed in. We're not worried about cleaning it up just yet, but we're just going to kind of get it roughed in. Again, I like to have things flow left to right and sort of like this, where it's all kind of in a line in the middle of the page. So it just so when you cycle through everything, it sort of has a look of this is what you kind of expect. And then if it's like, then if you actually get to page 2 and it's like this, it's like, ugh, what's going on? Anyway, so what we're going to do is kind of get things, we're going to ungroup everything, because you never want to delete accidentally. So everything's ungrouped now. And now what we want to do is select the stuff that I know is garbage. So we're going to get rid of that. We get rid of this. We don't need any of that. And you start closing in on things and get rid of these little jigs. See, magenta for me, go over that later, but magenta is a jig. So it's just for building. It has nothing to do with routing. These guys here are just stencils for routing. This information's on the other page, so I can get rid of that. The little green dots are what I use. These are called good to goes, GTG. Down here, I press this button, and it gives me a little dot, and it's my way of going through and auditing. I audit all of my parts to make sure that everything is good to go. So I double check everything, and I put a green dot on it. So all the green dots will go. And then what I do is sort of get everything lined up in a way that makes sense. Because again, what they'll do is they'll print this page in the back, and they'll use it as a way to checklist all the parts. So as the parts come out of the router department, they can make a little check themselves in an analog form on a paper. They'll print this out in tabloid, and it's their way of kind of making sure that everything's there and do kind of an inventory before they start work. Then they go through and bend everything up, and it all makes sense. It's a nice workflow. Everything's checks and balances. Errors and mistakes have, basically gone through the floor since doing this, because, there's a lot less chance of goofing up. And another benefit is that if you ever want to make another sign like this, then once it's all recorded like this, you just press play and make another one. You don't have to get back to the saw and cut for days and days. So get rid of all those. So kind of clean it up and put it in the middle there, And so it kind of looks nice, and it kind of makes sense that these are the middle parts, and then these will be the outside pieces. So, and then this is the frame face jigs. Kind of line them up like that. And this is the backside jigs. And again, we sort of line them up. And again, none of this is, absolutely necessary, but it just adds organization and flow and visual comfort, basically. And what I like to do here is just keep this to let them know that this is face up. So this right here just kind of stays off to the side, and it lets anyone know who's looking that this has not been flipped or mirrored, so it's face down. This is all face up. And it helps when you go to assemble it. You know that, this jig here with this 1 and this B face this way, face towards you. So that helps. And then same thing here. For the most part, these are all being routed face up. There's nothing here that's face down. A lot of times on the faces, if I recall, see, you'll be routing this from the back. So this is just informational flow. It's just double check, discount double check, that allows people to know that, yeah, this is flipped. That's mirrored. So, but for the most part, this is all kind of facing at you for the most part. So now I kind of have this set up this way, the way I like it, but I'm going to kind of bring it over because I need to make room for what we call info words. And these are words that will say what it's actually made out of, and kind of if there's a quantities thing, if we want to add that. Now, most of the time I have the quantities down here under each one. So that way the router department knows just to duplicate it, triplicate, whatever. So right now I'm kind of getting that set up. So that lives over here. So now that we're here, this is kind of this is it. So now we work with layers. So page turner, we can set them aside. And then from the launch pad, I have down here export files. For the first thing is layers machine. So this pops up. And this works in conjunction with the object manager. So this is where you want to bring in your object manager, and let's see. I'm not really a fan of the new object manager. Corel changed it. It's not quite as easy to use. All right, so so here's what you do. You start with the basics, you work your way down. So with layers, what we're doing with layers when we export to the CNC is, we discovered back in the day, I discovered that, so when you're working with the software for the CNC router, everything you cut, you can save as a strategy. So if you're cutting aluminum and you have a certain size bit and you're cutting that aluminum, a certain speed, a certain depth, a certain oil flow, things like that, or if you're cutting wood and you have a certain kind of bit and you're cutting that wood, you basically save that as a profile in that software, not this software, not Corel, but another software that essentially is called a strategy. And so after a while, you save all these different strategies. That way, if you're cutting the same material and over, you just go over, pull that strategy down, and there you go. So we had an aha moment, I did, at one point, that working with layers in Corel, normally with a graphics program such as this, when you work with layers, it's like layers of paper. You put one layer for an overlay of blue and another of red and stuff like that. So people have been working with layers in graphics programs for forever. But it dawned on me once by mistake, chocolate and peanut butter, Reese's peanut butter cups, that I accidentally exported some layers, and he was able to see those layers. And that gave me an aha moment where if you were to separate all the parts that you want on different strategies, you take the strategies from the router software and you come over here to Corel and you mimic those strategies and you meet in the middle. It makes it very, very easy to then create files. So if you could imagine back in the day, all of this would be sent to our router guy, and he would have to hand select this hole. He would have to hand select this hole. He would have to hand select this line. And hopefully he doesn't move it by accident, which would happen all the time. All of this would have to be hand selected. It could take up to an hour for him to assign the different strategies, different strategy for that, different strategy for this hole, different strategy for this. I want a different strategy for this little part right here. So yes, it could take forever. So once I kind of had that aha moment of, you know what if we put all the different things I want done on a layer and I send it to you and hand it off, it really was like, boom, there it is. So before I knew what I was doing though, I would come in here to the layers. You'd have to come here to the object manager and you'd have to create a new layer, and you would have to, name it and all of that. So it was tedious, but then once I found out how to code, then the layers machine was born. So what I did is basically created a language of strategies, if you will, of our layer names that the router department now expects to see. So now when they see these different layer names, it's just automatic, and they go ahead and go, oh, okay, yeah, that's so the way it goes is this. You start with the basics up top. So info words, you push that button and it adds info words layer. You can see right here, info words. So now this is just stuff like this that doesn't get routed. This is just informational words that will be turned off and made to get out of the way, that that will be, just for reference, just for information. Then the other part of it is the other side. So I look at it as a seven layer dip Super Bowl. So the top layer is the info words. The very bottom layer is the throughs and shapes. So that is the actual cutting out of this shape here, or you want to go through here. All these little holes go all the way through. So that is the other side of it. The very bottom layer is the throughs and shapes. So what you're going to do is hit throughs and shapes 5/32 and throughs and shapes whatever bit. So the whatevs bit means that it's dealer's choice. The router guy can figure out, he can choose which bit to use in order to just go fast. A thicker bit, a bigger bit might have less definition, but at least he can cut faster. But if there is a part like this hole here is only 0.165, if he cuts with a 1/4 inch bit, the bit is bigger than this hole, the software will just ignore it. The cutting software will ignore it. And then we're in trouble because all these holes won't be on the piece, and we'll either have wasted money or we can't put it together. So starting from the very beginning, if there's bits that I need, if I need something to be a 1/16 bit or a 3/16 bit or a 5/32 bit, which is our bread and butter for cutting 090 aluminum, I have to specify that. So again, it's about making sure that there are no ambiguous. There's no ambiguity. Everything's just nailed down. These holes are where I put them. I want you to use a 5/32 bit, and then that's it. So I'm making the choices. I'm laying it all out for him, so that way all the information is good to go when he gets there. So we're starting there. Now the next thing is reference kisses. So that's the next layer down. It's not all the way through. Most of the time it's only like 0.01 of an inch where the bit will just trace. You see like this top over here, the bit will just trace it. So I want that to be an on-center bit, on-center shape. So here you can see where you can choose the width of the bit. So maybe the bit might be a little thick, might be a little thin. So again, I know we use 5/32 bit. I don't want to have him change the bit. That takes time. It's tedious. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it a 5/32 bit. And so you can see here where it adds that. So I have reference kiss on layer, I have the 5/32 bit, and I have the throughs and shapes whatever bit. So you can see where the information is being built to pass on to him. So the next one is stud mounts. We don't have any studs that need to be mounted, but this is where we would do our bottom tap studs and letters for mounting on the wall. An island fill is sort of a engraving. So if you want to engrave into something halfway down, then you would set the depth here. So we're not using that obviously for this. The main thing we use though is bread and butter. This is our proprietary way we do things, is these bend scribes. So we definitely have bend scribes on this. It's these guys here. These lines are what our router bit will score all the way down, and allows us to bend this metal up at a very precise spot. And that way everything flows and everything's good. So this bend scribes, if this was a button in real life, it would be worn out, because we use this all day, every day. But this is all the different materials of aluminum and the different bit sizes all set up. So I can just go to my drop-down menu, pick the one I want, hit make layer, and I have a double check to make sure this is what you want, and I hit yes, and it pops it up. So we'll have our bend scribes right there. There it is. You can see here on the right. So I'm just working my way through. Is there any push through acrylic? No, there isn't. Push through is when the acrylic comes through the face. The other part is this custom layer. So if you have a layer that you want to, basically create a layer that's not here, then you can just hit this and it'll create that layer. And then copy layer names, paste layer names. So the other thing is, normally I'm doing an explainer right now, but basically this file is exactly the same as this file. So since I had already set this up, I could just go copy layer names, come over here and hit paste layers, and it will just copy and paste the whole thing. Just the names only, and then you can distribute. So now that I have this set up, I have info words, I have my bits that I need, I have my on-center reference kisses, all that stuff. I do have some inside reference kiss as well. So these guys here, the bit wants to go on the inside of this, not on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and make a reference case here, inside shape, and that will be there. I don't think I need any V-bits. I don't think I need anything else. You can always add it later. It's fine. Just looking now, so we're good. All right, so we're done with layers machine. We can close that. Now the next will be info words. So this pops up, this little guy. This is one of the very first things I created once I learned how to code. So this gives a drop down of all of our materials, the usual suspects. So that way I don't have to type this over and over and over. So I go here, 090, quantities as shown, export using layers, and then I say make some words. And what it does is it senses everything on the page and then makes it a certain percentage. Oops, I don't need you, go away. It makes it a certain percentage of the size of the height. So I'll grab this guy here, kind of shrink it down a little bit and kind of make it look nice. I like to have it right about like that. And it kind of matches what I got going here. All right, so now that we're here, we save that, and that's that. Now what we do is get ready to now parse all of these parts to their respective layers. But the first thing we need to do is, again, I just ungroup to paranoia. Just ungroup. Now what we do is we bring up the third thing over here off of the launch pad. Forgot you couldn't see that. So here's info words, is send it. So send it is a thing I created to help work quicker. Again, working with this object manager, especially the new version they made, is kind of difficult. It was a little easier back in the day. But essentially now, here's the page, right? The main face right here. We're on page, main face, page 2. Here's all our empty layers. Now you can tell a layer is empty because it doesn't have a caret right here. See, this means that there's things on there. So my info words automatically senses an info words layer, and it will automatically put these words on info words because these are not going to be routed. So it is important that that those aren't on there. So you can tell that there's something on info words and there's something on layer 1, which is all of this stuff is on layer 1 right now. And the rest of them are empty because there are no carets next to the layers. So to make it easy is I made this guy here. So what this does is this refreshes the layers here and it duplicates what our object manager kind of does for us, but it makes it easy to find parts. Maybe in another lesson or a session I'll talk about how I make sure I name everything. So if you go here to through shape on layer 1, that is the name of that 5/16 riv nut through hole, all of that stuff. Like anything that's a scribe, like a reference kiss, this F that's red as an outline is F on layer 1, or this top here, top on layer 1. The fact that it's a red outline, I have a button that will find them. So if I go over here and hit reference kiss, this automatically finds those and ignores everything else. And that really helps me parse out parts very quickly and helps me clean all this stuff up. So as you can see with this magenta here, or this light blue cyan here, these are just for building and these are reference only. I am not going to send that to the router department. As you can see here, this is what we want to send, just the parts that count. So I need to strip out all of these jigs and things, which looks like it could take a while, but I have a macro for that. So what you do is you come over here, and so you have your layer names on the send it, and then below that you have all of this for finding parts by name. So I have everything laid out, ready to go. So what I do is I come over here, and what I can do just to start, if I trust it. Now that's the thing, is you don't want to do everything too much too quickly because maybe you accidentally strip something you don't want to. So what you want to do is maybe start small and grab a few parts here. And if you go to the bottom here, it says Superscraper. So basically this scrapes all the stuff that's usual suspect, jiggies, inlines, rectangles, anything named guides, anything that was just for manufacturing and building virtually. I hit Superscraper, and that should just be selected. Then what I can do is just drag it over here out of the way, and then I can audit it real quick to make sure I don't see any little circles like these circles here. I don't want them in here. But this gets rid of my nuggets, like these guys here are nuggets. This magenta is a jiggy. That was just for building. So again, all that's good. I hit delete, we're done. So now these parts are cleaned up. So now it's just stuff that I want to send. Same thing here. So now I can go here, I can go ahead and hit Superscraper, and I can drag it out of the way, and then I can audit, make sure, kind of look around. Yes, these things are still there. I don't want those to accidentally get swept up. Because it's important that if you didn't name something, it might grab it because it wasn't named, so it doesn't know. It's not like it doesn't have AI built in yet. So I kind of look and I just see basic outline shapes, wireframe, and so that's all junk. So I save it, and let's see, same thing here, Superscrape, drag it down, make sure I see some nuggets. Yep, get rid of those. Mostly jigs and wireframe, all good. So now it's all cleaned up. So those parts are stripped. And then kind of given a basic audit again, like I'm familiar with things with the way they should be. Obviously to you this does not make sense at all, but to me, you know, you can kind of see if these are in line, you know, if these are out of place or if they're missing because if they accidentally got grabbed. So anyway, so I'm working my way over. Same thing here. What I'm going to do is just make sure that there aren't any duplicates, or I'm going to make sure I'm going to super scrape everything. So as you can see, the Superscraper ignores anything named through shape. So down here towards the bottom, it says through shape. That's the name of this thing. So anything that's a through shape will obviously go on the through shape layer. But that causes my Superscraper to ignore it. Now there's two right there that weren't named, and it wants to get rid of those. So that's why I'm going to kind of look at that. See, these are named rectangle. And I'm going to go ahead and hit down here on this button that says through, and I'm going to rename those to through shape. So now if I hit Superscraper, everything should be ignored, and that's the way it should be. And I'm going to hit Superscraper here. Same thing. These guys were not named through shape, which is not the end of the world, but it just causes the scraper to trigger. So I'm just going to name those. And Superscraper, nothing there. So then what you want to do is just check for duplicates. We check for duplicates in several instances, but for right now we're going to do it. So we're going to hit the Dupe Checker, which if you remember, I added some functionality to it in another video. And I'm just going to hit position and size. And it's going to go through every shape and compare it to every other shape and see where we have any duplicates. And it found a duplicate. And it moved them. So you can see where these two guys were stacked on top of these two. Now, if that were the case, the router will go through the first one first on the inside, and it will go on the outside the next one. So these two would have caused these big old holes that would have been a big problem. So I got rid of those, and we should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and just do it one more time, just because sometimes computers can be computers, but we should get nothing. There we go. So good to go. So now that we've got this all cleaned up, now we parse each piece out to its corresponding layer, which is essentially the strategy we want to use with the machines. So the first thing I do is I get all of the info words out of the way. So I select everything that's basically not routed. This is just informational words. I come over here to send it, and I go send a layer. So I select info words. So all these shapes are selected. I hit send a layer, and I hit hide. So right here, I shut off that layer, and everything should disappear. So now when I go to select everything else, those features that cannot be selected. And this is an integral part of why we do this, because when the guy goes to do the strategy, or the girl, when they go to do the strategy in the CNC department, they shut off the different layers, and then that just leaves the various other layers ready to be selected. And it goes from taking an hour to get a file ready to a mere minutes, if that. So I shut info words off. That's all out of the way, and then I just work my way down the layer cake. So I've got some inside reference kisses that I want, and I know that those are these two right here. So I'm going to take these two and just hand select those, and I'm going to send those. Oh, I selected the circle, not the thing. So I'm going to go ahead and send that to the inside reference kiss, and I'm going to hide it. See, now it's gone. Same thing here. I'm going to take this guy, and I'm going to send it to layer, and it's going to hide. Okay. Now the rest of these reds, I want just on center with the bit. So the bit can go right on the top of it, and it will scribe, and these are all directions for when they go to assemble it, they see side B, because they're going to have a big pile of parts, and it's very confusing. So it's worth the little bit of time it takes to reference kiss everything, so that way it's very clear, and they kind of expect it now. So when they go to look to see an arrow, that's up. So what I can do is grab here, and I'm just going to grab reference kiss. So I'm going to hit this button, and it's going to grab all reference kisses. Then I'm going to put those on the on center layer right here, send a layer, and I'm going to hide it, and they all go away. So same thing here. This is going to grab any red reference kiss letter. I'm going to send it to that layer, and it's gone. So now it's out of the way. So now we just keep working our way down. Now we have bend scribes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit bend scribe, this button. It finds everything named bend scribe, and I'm going to put it to that layer, and I'm going to hide it, just like that. So theoretically, and this is a way to just double check as you go. It's self-selecting, and it's almost, you know, self-correcting and self-auditing, where you go through, you work your way through all the parts and pieces, and there shouldn't be anything left. So now is when you use the bottom here. So now is when we're going to throughs and shapes, this particular hole is small enough that it needs to have its own bit. So I need to have the diameter bit. I have to make sure now that I'm selecting the proper diameter bits. So here we go. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to hit down here on the bottom 5/32 bit. So now every shape that fits with a 5/32 bit that's smaller than a 3/16, I'm going to hit this button and it's going to find it. So it's going to do the math, figure out that that part needs to be a 5/32 bit, and I'm going to put it to that layer. I'm going to send it, and I'm going to hide it. So there you go. So now look, all of those holes are gone. So like this hole is bigger than a 3/16. So all of these are bigger than 3/16. So if he chooses to switch over to a 3/16 bit, he can go faster, and the rest of these parts can be done with a 3/16 bit. And that's the advantage of doing that. So like these are UL holes, these are bigger than a 1/4 inch. So now he can choose to go to a bigger bit and fly, make up time. Because using the smaller bit means you have to go slower for your feed speeds. So now what's left is basically everything else that's on the very, very, very bottom. You can see here, throughs and shapes, whatever bit, that's on him. He can choose whatever bit works for him. If he wants to keep doing the whole thing with a 5/32, that's up to him. But I'm just letting him know that on the other layer, that's where everything lives. So now, for a double check, now everything is on its own layer. You come back to the page, which is page 2 here. You close everything up, and you double check that you've done it right. And it basically, you know, makes it much easier to not make mistakes. You look here, see there's no caret by layer 1. So layer 1 is our native. There's always a layer 1 on the when you fire up a page in Corel, you get a layer 1. So what I do is I select the whole page, and there shouldn't be anything selected. So now layer 1 has no caret next to it, which means it's empty. So what we do, and again, ambiguity is the enemy of production and logic and stuff. So don't hand off an empty layer, because the router department has to make a decision. Well, did he forget? Or was there supposed to be something on that layer, etc., etc. You need to make it very clear. This is exactly what I want. In logic, it's true. 2 trues equal a true. 2 falses equal a false. But if you have 1 true and 1 false, it is always false. And so you can't assume something's true if there also is a false. So you can't assume that this is complete if there's an empty layer. Basically, you're assuming that, oh yeah, he meant it was an accident, or was there supposed to be something on that layer, or et cetera, et cetera. So when I go to export this file, which we can go over at another point, I have my programming and my code looks for an empty layer, and it won't let me export with an empty layer. Every layer has to be accounted for, and it has to be verified, basically, so that way there are 0 ambiguities, 0 mistakes. Well, some mistakes. We're human. Some of us are human. So what I do is I delete layer 1, and then what I do is I just work backwards. So to make sure everything's right, I turn, see the little eyes over here? I turn info words back on, and it should just be the info words, right? And then I turn that off, and then I go ahead and do reference kiss inside. So I know that I only had 2 pieces reference kiss inside. And you can see where this is what the router guy does, or person, they select this, and that's their strategy. He assigns the strategy, and he's done. And he goes over and he shuts this off, and they turn this back on, and now here's all the reference kisses that I want on center, all laid out for them. And they go ahead and assign that strategy, shut that off. And see, this is what I'm saying is they've changed how this with Corel 2020, they changed the object manager, and it's very difficult to work with. So anyway, so now you turn on the bend scribes. Here's the bend scribes, and you turn on the through bits. Now you can see where all these holes Could you imagine having to find these holes by hand back in the day before before the strategy stuff where layers where you'd have to go through and find every one of these holes and hopefully you don't move them, hopefully trying to pick them out amongst other pieces without bumping that piece. Yeah, it was a tumultuous time learning all that. And then at the very end, this should be the only thing on this layer. And then when you go back through, you turn everything on, because if you don't turn it back on, it won't export. So you make sure everything's turned back on. So one last little thing, I usually like to add a little detail for when the guys are using this to inventory parts. What they do is they print this out like on a tabloid paper. So our fabrication department will print this out. This whole thing, this whole Corel file gets exported as a PDF for reference for our fab guys in the back to be able to read all of this stuff, and they can make sense of it, and it helps them kind of understand where I was thinking, because I have a lot of this stuff here, like back of frame, stuff like that. So they can kind of go through and read what I was thinking. I have all this, and it shows where these parts go. But they will also use this page, they'll print this on a tabloid, and they'll make a check mark, and they use it to inventory all the parts coming off the router department. So they'll go through and check that they have all of this. And so since they are referencing this, I do put them a couple guides. Now these particular pieces need to be bent in the metal brake in a certain order. Otherwise, we're going to trap ourselves and you can't bend it. And it could be an expensive problem because you'll have to reroute the piece. So what I'll do is I'll copy and I'll paste that right in. And what that does is, bend this first, bend this second, right? And again, this is more info words. Does this get routed? No, this is purely informational. So I'll select these and I'll make sure that they are in the info words layer, and I'll grab that by using my send it here. So I actually have, these are called alphas. So if I grab these and I hit over here, it's called alphas, it will find these and automatically put those there like that. I'll send that to layer. There we go. And I'm thinking that looks kind of how I want it. This is what our production files kind of look like. Now I'm going to want quantities. So I'm going to leave this because this is the quantity. So over here, this gives us C layers, which means this is redundant now. Everything we do is layers. But back in the day, a file might not have had layers on it. So I had layers. So C layers, reference that. It gives the material, and that's how every one of these is. And then also, if it's quantities is shown, then it's quantities is shown. If I wanted 2 sets of these, then what I'll do is I'll come over here to my launch pad, and I have a quantity section here. So what I'll do is I do want two sets of these. So I'll hit quantity 2, sets as shown. And what that's going to do is automatically put that there. And then I will make it the size I want. So down here I have a button that will change the size of this. So we're going to go a 12-inch, and that looks good. So basically he understands that this set, I need 2 of these because there are 2 signs. And same thing here. So again, redundant. But now I'm going to set my size over here. See over here, I'm going to do this drop down. I'm going to go size 10, and then there we go. So quantity 2 sets is shown, quantity 2 sets is shown. And nice and clear, nice and concise. And once you have info words, word layer already made, then every time I hit the quantity button over there on my launch pad, it will automatically find my info words layer and automatically have that on there. So I don't have to go back over this. So I can shut this off. You can see all the info words go away. So as soon as they have their info. So basically that's it. And now it's ready to export. So that will be for some other time. But basically that is how you go from, let's see, page turner. That's how you go from that to that and ready to export. That's how we do it.